Hello, welcome to Enchantment of Eternities Revisited for Datalore. My original review for Datalore was uploaded on my channel on August 14th, 2023. So during the just about a little bit over a year ago, I guess from now. God, I've been doing this for a while. Doing the reviews one episode at a time. It was a part of that. And this is a part of a poll that I did after I finished covering Star Trek The Next Generation. I had the bright idea, because I used to do these polls all the time on my channel where I do 5 episodes, have everyone choose between 5 episodes from each of the 5 Star Trek series, and so I'd review one from each of the 5, whatever episode wins the poll. And I kind of was a little bit nostalgia for that. I did that because I stopped doing it, obviously, after I started covering the episodes in order, one episode at a time. But I did that once in between season 3 and 4 of TNG, and I figured I'd do it once TNG finished, which is now. And I think I'm going to do it one more time. I believe what I've decided, unless it changes, is in between seasons 5 and 6 of Deep Space Nine. Which is also in between seasons 3 and 4 of Voyager, because they air side by side. So, and I think that's the last time I'm going to do polls, or do these polls, and maybe once I finish covering everything, I might do a poll where there's all revisiteds, but that will be the last time so just one more time before I'm done. Which it is going to take me a while to get there. But anyway, so Datalore won the TNG poll. And part of me was, the lazy part of me was hoping it would be an episode I already did a revisited for, but it wasn't, so I do another one, and it's meant to be public. So one thing I want to talk about with Datalore that I didn't mention, very important thing, I didn't mention my original review. I don't know how. I had this giant oversight, is that there's Tucker tubes in this episode. If you don't remember, if you don't know what I'm talking about, it's a reference to Lower Decks. But there's this prop that apparently features not just in tons of Star Trek, but tons of science fiction movies and shows, and apparently it's everywhere. It's these tubes that have these blinky, flashing lights, and it's just there for ambience. It never actually does anything. I think the movie Airplane 2 with William Shatner that was supposed to be set in space, I didn't like it that much. I hadn't seen it in a long time because I wasn't a big fan of it, but I do remember they had a thing where they showed the Tucker tubes, and William Shatner is like, what do these things do? They just blink on and off and off. They have served no purpose. And then Lower Decks is what gave them the name Tucker tubes, named after Charles Tucker III from Enterprise. Where they were in engineering, and what's his face, Rutherford wanted promotion, so he wanted to improve the Tucker tubes, but apparently Livik beat him to it and created a third Tucker tube. But I still don't think they actually say what they do yet. But I noticed in the lab they go to, because they wanted to look all weird sci-fi, so let's throw in the tubes. And that's in every science fiction. That's very important. I can't believe I didn't mention that. Other than that, most of what I said, it was covered. I did mention in my original review that the original idea for this episode was a female android that would sort of be a love interest for Data, and it was Brent Spiner who said he didn't like that idea, and instead came up with the evil twin trope. And in my review, I talked about how that was terrible and how Brent Spiner sucks for doing that, and the girlfriend idea would have been much better. But, after watching this episode, the more I think about it, the more I come to the conclusion that probably would have sucked as well. Because it's season 1 of TNG, and no matter what they do. And I can just imagine them doing a girl android that Data has a romance for, and just how incredibly, just imagine it in the style and tone of season 1 in TNG, just how incredibly cheesy and dumb. I don't know part of me thinks it has the potential to be worse. But then again, this whole evil android trope was bad enough. It's funny because when I first saw this episode, I was gonna say when it first came out, but I didn't see it when it first came out. I saw it a couple years after it came out. I was 11 or 12. But when I first saw it, I used to love this episode, and I remember liking it for a good long while. It wasn't until I think I was an adult where I saw this in the theater. I talked about how I saw it in the theater when I lived in New Zealand, but I was visiting America, and I was in San Francisco, and they were showing in a few select theaters throughout the country in celebration of the release of the Blu-ray of the season 1 Blu-ray. They showed this in 2 episodes, this and Where No One Has Gone Before. And I remember enjoying Where No One Has Gone Before, but then I saw this one, and it was this. I think when I really realized that, hey, this episode is not good. It kind of sucks. But I don't know why that is. Maybe it's because I was just young and I didn't, too young to notice all the flaws and just how ridiculous, and it's just a stupid android twin stereotype thing. Evil twin, I shouldn't say. But I think, and I think I talked about this. I talked about this in some other video, but I think part of it has to do with the fact that I saw Brothers first. And that was I have my issues with Brothers now, but back then I didn't. But regardless of my issues, even the ones I still have, it was a much, much better portrayal of Lore. Lore is, I hated what they did at the start of the episode with Data taking over the Enterprise. I think there's tons of flaws in that. And it doesn't make sense why Dr. Noonien Soon would make him do that and not give a shit and purposely prevent him from communicating with the Enterprise, other than the fact that so the plot could happen. That seems to be the only reason all that shit happened. But the actual portrayal of Lore was way, way, way better. They didn't portray. He was kind of, they portrayed him as not all there and kind of fucked up, which is how they should have portrayed him in the first place. But in here, they just portray him as outright right evil. He's just flat out evil. He's twirl my mustache. Whereas Brothers was much more dynamic. He was you saw him show emotion to Dr. Soon. It was you can't die. They did a much, much better job. And then Descent comes along and they turn him evil again. So Brothers was really the only good portrayal of him. But anyway, I saw that episode first. So when I went back and watched Datalore, it was kind of like a prequel for me. It was here's the origin story of the character that I already know. And I think that might have helped on why I liked that episode better back then. It's because I wasn't being introduced to this character. I already knew who this character was, and I was just getting his backstory, which is actually kind of different. But I also think it's just because I was younger and less experienced. It's funny because going back and doing these poll winners, because I just finished covering season 7 of Next Generation, and so all of Next Generation, and just finished up to season 2 of Deep Space Nine. I was kind of cringing about how I would feel and going back to the original series because I was I'm not a huge fan of the original series, and I was kind of done, very happy to have it over and done with. So I was kind of like, oh, how am I gonna? Is it gonna be kind of whiplash after watching like high quality stuff, like all of like the good seasons of Next Generation and early seasons of Deep Space Nine, or it gets better, but they're still decent. It's still like a better quality than the original series. And I thought, oh, going back to the original series is. I'm kind of dreading it, but I was actually fine. Even though the episode I watched was Assignment Earth, which is a terrible episode, it still didn't give me that sort of whiplash of, oh, this is so hard to consume now. But when I watched this episode, it did. It's funny. It was harder for me to watch this episode than it was Assignment Earth because... as much as I like to rail on the original series, and they do have a lot of bad episodes, I think the quality in terms... Because here's the thing. I think for the time it was released, it was a better quality. Like, it was a good quality for the 60s. It doesn't age well, but it was still good, decent quality at the time. Whereas I think this was actually a poor quality for... the time it was made, that in the 80s they could do a lot better, and this is way cheesy even for the time it was made, which I think is exemplified by the fact that season 3 was also in the 80s, well, 89 to 90, and that quality is like only a billion times better than the quality here. It's just so cheesy, like the picture quality, the story quality, the acting, the music. Now, I know the music is done by the same people who did later seasons, What's-His-Face, Dennis McCarthy and Ron Jones. There we go, it came to me. I don't remember which one of them did this, but I know that both their music sound cheesier in the first season than it did in later seasons. It's like when the show got better, their music got better as well. I think they no longer had to match the cheesy tone. Although I will say, I think Ron Jones's music, for the most part, stayed a little cheesy, which is why I liked him less and like Dennis McCarthy more. I mean, again, we've been through this a billion times, but Ron Jones does have some good scores that I like The Defector and Best of Both Worlds, and Booby Trap's a bit overrated, but there's a few others like that I do like, but I still just overall prefer Dennis McCarthy. I just think that he just has the better score, in my opinion. Jay Chataway came after Ron Jones left, and he's a bit more bland, I suppose, and a lot of people make fun of the wallpaper music. They're usually talking about him. But to be fair to him, he has some good scores here and there as well. I just think that Dennis McCarthy is the best. But I don't even know which one of them did this episode, because they both sound equally cheesy in the first season. Hold on, I'm going to look it up now out of curiosity. But yeah, no, not just the music, but also the like the visuals, like the lighting was actually like terrible, and not just the lighting, but the art department. Like everything looks so sparse and dark. Like I'm particularly thinking of the scenes when after they bring Lore back up to the ship and they're reassembling him, like the quality of the picture and the lighting and the art direction, the rooms, like there's no props anywhere and it just seems sparse, and it's just everything about, and of course the uniforms and the acting's a bit, the dialogue's worse, like everything about season 1 is just much more. And this is why I think some people think season 2 is better, because it does improve a little bit in terms of production value, but I actually think that the scripts got worse in season 1, and that's just my humble opinion. And I just think they come off as more season 2. Did I say season 1? Season 2, the scripts get worse because they come off as just too sitcom-y, and I think that's a result of Maurice Hurley who, to my knowledge, didn't come from sitcoms, but he come from like cheesy 80s shows like Miami Vice and stuff, which I hadn't seen in years, so I'm almost positive, though, if I went back and watched it, I would find it incredibly cheesy. But anyway, for whatever reason, Maurice Hurley seemed to have this cheese sitcom feel to it, and yeah, I think it's in many ways, season 2 is worse. I mean, he did shit like Up the Long Ladder. But anyway, it's just, yeah. And I didn't make fun of the thing with Data holding, Lore's head when he first finds it, because that's very obviously a mannequin. It's like, oh, we found this mannequin. Look, it kind of looks like me, doesn't it? Because, that's kind of like making fun of the original series and their props, because they had an extremely low budget. And, like, if you compare it to season 5, they when they had Data's head in like Times Arrow, like that prop was like only 1 billion times better. I mean, it still didn't really look like a human head. You could still tell it was a prop, but nowhere near, like not even approaching anywhere near as bad as the head here. It looked this like very obviously mannequin. I was like, oh, look at this mannequin. Okay, so this episode with this music, I just looked it up. It is Ron Jones. It is in fact Ron Jones who did this score. But yeah, if I'm being honest with myself, the Dennis McCarthy's season 1 score wasn't much better than Ron Jones. So they both kind of sucked in season 1. I mean, there's aspects of the music that I like in this episode. So it's like not all of it was terrible, but some of it just sounds, it's just too 80s cheese for me. Like don't no 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 don't. Anyway, anywho, well, I guess now would be as good a time as any to go ahead and show you the pitch meeting, because if you watch, if you're familiar with Ryan George, his pitch meeting channel on YouTube, I'm a huge fan of that, where he dresses up as both the producer guy and the writer guy, and the writer guy is trying to pitch a movie. And I love that channel. I've done it once for the episode Shadow Play. It was kind of a patron comment written out thing, and I just did the full on thing. Well, after watching this episode, it's like I kept hearing like the producer guy, like the pitch meeting writer guy in my voice, like, oh, this is Lore and he's evil. And I thought, oh, fuck it, I'll just do another one again. But I do want to give the disclaimer that this is meant as an homage to the pitch meetings, to Brian George's pitch meetings. And if you haven't checked it out, absolutely check it out. I promote the hell out of that. I'm never going to release my own version of it as its own video, because it's not my original idea. I'm taking a lot of the catchphrases and stuff that he uses, but he doesn't do Star Trek episodes, so that's why I wanted to do it, and I thought this would be a great episode to do it in. So anyway, please enjoy my pitch meeting for Datalore. So, you have an episode for me? Yes, sir, I do. It's called Datalore. So, is this the episode where we get Data's backstory? His lore? Yes, sir, that's correct. It's also called that because we find another android just like Data whose name is Lore. Seems kind of a strange name for an android to have. Did you just name him that so you could do a double entendre with the title? Yeah. I also figure in the future they can find an even earlier prototype of Data called B4 because he came from before. Get it? Ah! No. Well, anyway, in this episode, the Enterprise is going to go to the planet where Data was found 23 years ago to investigate his origins. So why are they going there now after all this time? Because that works. So once they're on the planet, they find all plant and wildlife has been destroyed, and they go to the spot where Data was found. That's by a cave. And then Geordi, using his visor, will find there's a secret entrance to the colony that they didn't know existed. Oh, so the Starfleet ship that was there earlier didn't know there was a colony there? No. They knew there was a colony there. They just couldn't find it because they didn't have someone with Geordi's visor. So they were looking for a colony but couldn't find it despite having all this advanced Starfleet scanning technology that must be far superior to Geordi's visor, and despite having over 23 years to do so? That's what we're going with. Well, okay then. So then they explore the colony, which is totally deserted, but they see tons of beds and living facilities that are empty. And the crew finds drawings from children hanging on the wall of people running away from a giant snowflake, which is what leads the crew to find out that all the colonists were killed by a creature called the crystalline entity. It consumes all organic matter, which is why the surface of the planet is completely destroyed. So why is the colony intact? Because it was hidden behind the secret wall. Then how did everyone die if they're inside the hidden colony? Because they were outside, I guess. Why would they all be outside if a giant creature that consumes all organic matter is outside destroying the planet? Wouldn't they go in and hide? And how were the children able to draw pictures of the entity killing people? Did the kids come in from outside, draw pictures of people dying, then hang them on the walls, then go back outside so they could get killed? Well, maybe the crystalline entity did get inside and managed to kill all the people. Remember, it only destroys organic matter. But then why is the cave wall still intact? If it got inside, wouldn't that be destroyed? And I know the entity only consumes organic matter, but if it were busy killing people with a beam, that would effectively trash the colony, and at the very least, it would be a mess. Yet here, it's all pristine and neat. Listen, sir, I'm gonna need you to get all the way off my back about how the colonists died. We just need to set up for a scary monster that will threaten the Enterprise. Well, let me get off that thing. So, they also discovered that Data's creator was a man named Dr. Noonien Soon, who was the foremost expert in cybernetics, which shocks them all. You mean they didn't know who Data's creator was and didn't even think to consider it was the foremost expert in cybernetics? That's what we're going with. So, after they explore some more, they discover another android who looks just like Data, but he's disassembled and in pieces. So they take him back to the Enterprise and reassemble him, and he wakes up and says his name is Lore. Hey, that's from the episode title. Yes, sir, it is. So Lore turns out to be evil. Oh no! And it turns out that he's the one that summoned the crystalline entity to the colony to kill everyone. But the colonists were scared of him because he was evil, and they made Dr. Soon disassemble Lore and build another android without emotions. That became Data. So Lore summoned the crystalline entity to the colony and then was disassembled, and then Dr. Soon had time to build another android and to perfect him before the crystalline entity arrived? What took it so long to get here? I don't know. And why would Dr. Soon just leave Lore's parts out in the open ready to be reassembled without so much as a warning note saying, "Warning, evil android, do not reassemble"? So the episode could happen. So, because Data finds out Lore is evil, Lore is going to turn off Data using an off switch on his back. And he switches clothes and pretends to be Data. He's also going to stop using contractions like isn't and can't, because Data can't use contractions. He can only say cannot or is not. So Lore's going to go to the bridge disguised as Data just in time to see the crystalline entity approaching, and he's going to say, "Beautiful, isn't it?" So the rest of the crew figure out immediately that it's Lore because he just used a contraction and showed a ton of emotions? No, nobody seems to notice except Wesley. But Wesley tries to warn them that it's actually Lore, but nobody listens to him, and eventually Picard is going to tell him to shut up. And this is going to become a fan favorite moment because everyone always wanted someone to tell Wesley to shut up. But why is Wesley the only one that noticed its Lore? Seems like it should be pretty obvious to everyone. Because we have orders from Gene Roddenberry to make sure Wesley is always the smartest and best character on the show at all times, and that this untrained 14-year-old kid is always better at his job than all the older, more experienced, trained officers. Oh yeah, I forgot about those orders. Anyway, after Picard and Riker get irritated with Wesley for pointing out the obvious, they're going to make him go with Riker and Data, who's really Lore, to check on Lore, who's really Data. There, Lore is going to finger Data's button several times, making him twitch so that Riker and Wesley will think that it's Lore. Oh, fingering Data's button to make him twitch is tight. Okay. So then Lore is going to return to the bridge to deal with the crystalline entity, and he's going to tell Picard that they should beam a tree out into space and destroy it in order to demonstrate to the crystalline entity that they're a threat. But really, he just wants the Enterprise to lower its shields so that the crystalline entity can kill them all. That sounds like a terrible plan. Why would Picard agree to this? So the episode can happen. And why would there be a tree on the Enterprise? Do they just have trees lying around? Maybe they replicated one or took it from the Arboretum, I guess? So anyway, Wesley is going to convince his mother to go with him to Data's room to try to convince her that the android lying disabled on the floor is actually Data. Ooh, it's going to be difficult to convince Dr. Crusher that that's really Data on the floor. Actually, it's going to be super easy. Barely an inconvenience. Oh, really? So yeah, Wesley's just going to turn Data on, and he's going to act like Data, and Dr. Crusher is going to immediately be convinced. But wait, you just said that Crusher and everyone else was convinced it was Lore lying on the ground. Why is she going to be convinced it's Data just because he said so? So the episode can happen. Anyway, Data is going to go with the Crushers to the cargo bay to stop Lore from destroying the ship. And Lore is going to tell Data that he brought him wonderful gifts, referring to the Crushers, and is going to ask Wesley if he knows what kind of death he earned. For being the only one who isn't stupid? For being the only one who isn't stupid, that's right, sir. But Dr. Crusher is going to pull out a phaser and threaten Lore, but Lore is going to shove Data into Dr. Crusher and then grab her phaser away from her. Doesn't Data have super strength? Why wasn't he able to stop this from happening? So the episode can happen. So Lore is going to force Dr. Crusher to leave under the threat of killing Wesley and then shoot her in the arm, which catches on fire right as she's leaving. But Data is going to use this as a distraction to attack Lore, and he throws him on the transporter pad, so Wesley is going to beam him out into space. And then the crystalline entity leaves. Picard and Riker then come into the cargo bay and ask Data if he's okay, and he says, "I'm fine." Wait, he just used a contraction, and the whole episode was based on the fact that he can't use contractions. Whoops! Whoopsie! So did Picard apologize to Wesley because he didn't listen to him when he should have? Nah, he just says something about Data becoming more human and then we're done. So what do you think? Seems like this is just a typical evil twin trope. Won't audiences think that this is ridiculous? Not when we bring Lore back several times. What? So one thing that I didn't mention, I didn't work in there because it was long enough. That was the problem. That it was like 10 minutes and the pitch meetings are usually supposed to be like 5 or 6 minutes. I went a bit long. But one thing I didn't mention that I wanted to kind of work in there was how how can lore communicate with the crystalline entity? Because the crystalline entity is like, they're like, oh, Picard's like unable to communicate, and he's like, Data, can you communicate? Which is really lore, but he's like, Data, can you communicate with it? And he's like, yeah. Oh no, well, Data, who's really lore, comes up and is like, oh, let me communicate with it. And Picard's like, I can you do that? I didn't know you could do that. And then the crystalline entity attacks, and he's like, yeah, go ahead and do it. And so he just contacts it. It's like, I am, the android Data, which is, of course, the second time he communicated, because we saw him communicating with it earlier, saying, oh, you can come eat all these people on the ship, and I'll identify myself as Data. And then later, he communicates with it again. It's like, I'm about to lower the shields, and you can kill everyone. So he's just speaking English. Why is it that he's the only one that can communicate with the crystalline entity when all he's doing is speaking English? It seems like anyone else could speak English. And of course, this is inconsistent with the Silicon Avatar episode, because they're unable to communicate with the crystalline entity, and so they're trying all these like different beings and things, and all being crystals, and we're able to communicate. This is wonderful. I'm like, but Lord just spoke to it in English and understood him. Why don't they just speak to it in English? Like, I don't know. I mean, that's, to be fair, that aspect of it is more of a problem with Silicon Avatar, that they're not being consistent with this episode. But god damn, that episode is just so much better. Like, that's part of why I'm so impressed with Silicon Avatar, because it took like this silly, goofy monster thing and like made it like a very serious, heavy, emotional plot based off of it, and I was super impressed. I talked about how this episode's been retconned several times, with brothers saying that Dr. Soon actually survived, which is different to what's implied here. And then also later, the even worse retcon is the inheritance in season 7 that says that Dr. Soon in fact was married and had a wife, and this is totally like they're hiding this fact because the mother didn't approve of the marriage, and that's why Data didn't know about it. Like that was a bit step too far. But out of all those sort of adding in lore to this episode, no pun intended, is that the one I think works best is the Silicon Avatar, because that actually really improves everything. Now, granted, yeah, it wasn't consistent with the fact that Laura could just speak English to it, but you know what? That's, that episode is just so ridiculously superior to this one. I don't mind them retconning it a little bit, or being a bit inconsistent in that regard. Now, speaking of Dr. Soon, kind of has hinted at in the pitch meeting, like, I hinted at that they didn't know that Dr. Soon was Data's creator, but that's actually kind of unclear. I just realized that I didn't work in an unclear in the pitch meeting. I should have done that. Oh well. But anyway, the one thing that's unclear is whether or not they actually knew that Dr. Soon, because Geordi seemed to be surprised. Like, they said, oh, Dr. Soon is the foremost expert in cybernetics, my friend. And then Riker Yara is like, oh, Yara said, yeah, he was trying to create this vision of a positronic brain, and everyone laughed him out. And Riker's like, now we know what happened to him. He went here to redo it, and he was successful. So the way he's talking, the way they're all talking sounds like they didn't know that. They're like, oh my god, Dr. Soon actually created an android. Like, they knew he was trying to create a positronic android, and yet they're acting like they're just figuring out for the first time that Data's creator. Where the fuck do you think Data came from? Like, what? But the thing that contradicts this is that Data seems to know that Dr. Soon is his creator. He's like, oh yes, Dr. Noonien Soon, the one who created me. So Data seems aware of it, so I don't know why any of those fuckers aren't aware of it, especially when it should be blatantly obvious. But yeah, and so the other thing about this that always bothered me, and I don't remember if this is the first episode they mention it, but the whole thing about Data not being able to use contractions, he can't say can't or isn't, he has to say cannot. Like, he's a fucking advanced android. He's like super intelligent, yet he can't use contractions. Now, kind of what I get, and what I'm sort of getting out of the episode after rewatching it, because growing up, I always thought that was the case, that's what they're saying, that he is incapable of using contractions. But I don't know, after rewatching it just now, that maybe what they're saying is he chooses not to use contractions, because lore has this whole thing is like, you say is not and cannot, and I say isn't and can't. The way lore says that implies that Data is incapable of using contractions, but I think maybe they were just fucking that line up, and maybe the rest, because the way that lore states it when he's pretending to be Data, he says, oh yes, I use language more formally than lore. And that makes it sound like a choice, not a thing I'm incapable of using contractions, that I choose to speak more formally. But that would make more sense if that's the case. But even still, and plus the thing I pointed out in the pitch meeting is that he uses a fucking contraction. He says I'm, and they don't even notice that. And I wanted to growing up, I kept thinking the characters, I just wanted them to react by saying, "Oh my God, it's lore! He just used a contraction." Yeah, that's I mean, that is a huge fumble to put in the episode, because the whole point, you draw attention to the fact, you make it a huge plot point of the episode that he can't use contractions, and then you go ahead and have him use a contraction randomly at the end. Yeah, but anyway, so last thing I wanted to talk about was the whole hallway meme. I don't think I talked about this in my original review, and I meant to. Maybe I did, I don't know. But it's become, I don't know about any of you, but for me on my Facebook feed and throughout, and this has been going on for years, is that I see all these memes with Data and Laura in the hallway, where Laura is kind of looking at him, pointing a finger, and Data is like... And so what they tend to use it at, whenever there's I'll put up some examples for you, although these aren't the best examples, they're the only one I could find. But it's basically when there's something that's written that could be read either up and down or side to side, and it's usually when it's meant to be read up and down or something, but your tendency is to be read side by side, and sometimes the side by side spells something funny or raunchy, and so they have where Data usually says, "Oh, it reads it the way it was intended to be read," but then Laura reads it the other way. That's actually kind of funny. I don't know, it's not the best example of this, but one of my favorite examples, because it's not letter by letter, sometimes it's letter by letter, but one of my favorite example is the one where where it says, you matter, don't give up, but it says you, and then underneath is matter, but next to it says don't, and then at the bottom, give up. But if you read that side by side, it says, you don't matter, give up. I think they did one with Data and Laura like that too, and Laura is pointing at. And then they do little spoofs off of it, because those hallway memes are so fucking common. They just start making fun of the hallway memes itself. So now I can't watch that scene when they're in the hallway. I can't see that without thinking of all the fucking memes. There's tons of them. But anyway, so my original rating for Datalore, I believe, was a 3 out of 10, I want to say. And yeah, I'll stick with that. I'll stick with the 3 out of 10. That seems about right to me. It's just, I don't know why I used to like this episode, and I don't know why people still do like this episode. This still seems to be, as I said, out of all the episodes of season 1 that they chose to show in that, theatrical screening, they chose, well, also Where No One Has Gone Before, which is a good choice. But then they chose this one, which is why as they symbolize as one of the more popular episodes of season 1. In fact, I was just watching a couple of reviews that in fact point to this as one of the better episodes of season 1. Like this review I just watched said, it's the reason why season 1 sucks is because it doesn't have any good character stories and it's all about plot. And they say, there's a few exceptions like Datalore, which has a good character story. And I'm like, what? Like what? At what the actual? It does not have a good character story, not at all. So I think I said this before. If I was choosing the episodes to show in the theater, it would have been Where No One Has Gone Before and Conspiracy. But then Conspiracy probably be more too violent, like the guy's head blowing off. Although they fucking showed that on TV in the middle of the day, but that may not be the family friendly episode to show. So what Symbiosis? But most people think that's boring. I think that's the best episode of season 1. Yeah, I don't know. I probably Skin of Evil is probably the one I would have shown, actually. One of those later, because season 1 got a little bit better later in the season, so I would have shown one of those later episodes, not this one. But that's just me. So anyway, that's it for my Revisited for Datalore. Thank you so much for watching this. A stroll down memory lane. So let's see what's coming up on the old channel here. So I gotta finish off the poll winners. So Wednesday, it's gonna be the D Space 9 poll winner, which is Way of the Warrior. So new review. And then Thursday, the Voyager poll winner is Course Oblivion. And Saturday will be the Enterprise poll winner, Acquisition. Jesus Christ. You guys just like torturing me, I think. And then on Monday, next Monday, I will do a video outside of Star Trek, which is very unusual for me. But I'll do my top 10 winners of my top 10 shows of the year. So in that video, I'm going to take the winner of every year I've done a top 10 shows of the year and do a top 10 with the winners. That should be fun. Anyway, so that's what's coming up on my channel. You can support me on Patreon if you want. If you want to see a lot more of these Revisited, I have a ton of them up on Patreon, exclusive for Patreon supporters. Or if you just don't feel like supporting me on Patreon, hey, that's totally understandable. You can still support the channel by subscribing, giving a like, leaving a comment, that sort of thing. Everything sort of helps me out a lot. So thanks so much for watching, and be sure to check out my channel as I continue to go down the Star Trek memory lane and cover Star Trek. And thanks a lot for watching.